My take, based on the evidence of my eyes and ears, is that we're witnessing one of the biggest political cover-ups in modern history. And if I may, let me just give you an example of why I say that. First and foremost, we know that Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi openly told the American public, we're going to come in and we're going to release the Epstein files. It's going to show this cabal of corrupt pedophiles and sex traffickers. And then they got in power. They saw the files. What did they do? They closed the Epstein co-conspirator investigation.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I came across a panel discussion that quickly turns intense on Piers Morgan Uncensored, where commentators including Anna Kasparian, Christopher Rufo, and Wajahat Ali go head-to-head over government transparency and what the public is actually being told. As Wajahat Ali begins laying out his perspective, the tone in the room shifts, and the discussion becomes more serious as he connects key points and raises broader concerns.
Yeah, Buck.
I don't want to step on my colleague's time here, but just really quickly, we don't know how he got the money. And this is one thing that I'm kind of astonished still. You know, you can just do a quick Google search or Grok or whatever. Epstein was worth over $600 million.
Yeah.
And people want to say that it was tax advice. I've got a tax advisor, guys. He's not worth $600 million. I mean, this is crazy. There's no way.
No, I agree. I think the money trail on Epstein is a bit like the trail on Thomas Crooks until now, is that it's been wrapped in complete mystery. Chris Rufo, I mean, you know, like I say, I'm going to make a point again. It's very unusual to get such unanimous kind of shared opinion about this, which I think, as Anna said, it goes to the heart of this, which is it's become a kind of, you know, bipartisan thing where people on the left and right are united in wanting this stuff out there. So I don't think any attempt to hold stuff back going forward is going to work. I think it's going to cause a lot more problems. What is your best theory about why Trump hasn't moved faster to reveal all this, given that he was indicating he wanted to? You know, for what it's worth, I interviewed David Boies, who was one of the top criminal lawyers in American history. He was Virginia Giuffre's attorney. He represented a number of other of the victims with his firm. And a few weeks ago, he came on and said he's seen the files and there is nothing that incriminates Donald Trump criminally. But there was stuff in there which in his opinion would lead to prosecutions of between 6 and 12 high-profile men. Now, could it be, I just simply posit this as a theory, that it's not Trump who's worried about Trump, but Trump may be worried about some of the other people who maybe he knows, friends, who knows, right? I don't know. Are there other people who may be fearing criminal prosecution who are putting heat on him not to reveal this?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly possible. It's also plausible, given the network of associates around Jeffrey Epstein. We know that these were some of the most powerful and influential people all over the world. Certainly people that have the capacity to do lobbying, to do high pressure, to dangle donations where need be. And so your theory, of course, we'll have to get the facts, but it's certainly one possibility that should be explored. But there's a broader question here, because it's not just Epstein or Crooks or Charlie Kirk or JFK or MLK. It's all of these. And so the question we need to be asking and really digging into is, what is the common denominator for the reason that all of these bits and pieces of information are not making it through to the public?
This is where the discussion becomes particularly interesting, because Buck raises a point that many believe should have been central from the very beginning. He highlights claims that Jeffrey Epstein had a net worth exceeding $600 million, which some have attributed to things like financial or tax advisory work. But that explanation immediately raises deeper questions about how such wealth was actually accumulated, and whether the publicly available explanations fully account for it. From there, the conversation shifts into speculation about why certain information hasn't been fully disclosed. A theory is floated, suggesting that those in positions of power may be less concerned about themselves individually and more concerned about the potential implications for people within their broader networks, including associates, donors, or influential connections who could be affected if more details were released. That idea ties into a larger concern about how interconnected power structures operate. As Christopher Rufo points out, the individuals linked to this discussion represent a wide network of highly influential figures with access to political, financial, and institutional leverage. In that context, the issue isn't just about one person, but about whether overlapping interests among powerful actors can influence what information reaches the public. Rufo also raises a broader question that many observers see as central. Why does important information consistently fail to make it through to full public disclosure? He asks whether the cause lies in decisions made at the top, in layers of administrative management, or within entrenched bureaucratic systems. This question reflects a wider pattern that critics point to: repeated delays or gaps in transparency across multiple high-profile matters. Ultimately, the conversation returns to accountability. If there are systemic barriers preventing transparency, identifying where those barriers exist becomes essential. Without clarity on who or what is responsible, the public is left with unresolved questions and ongoing skepticism about how information is managed and released.
Is it the political decision at the top? Is it a middle management decision, people in cabinet positions or oversight positions? Or is it part of the permanent bureaucracy that for whatever reason is loath to release information to the public? Or is it simple incompetence? For example, with the JFK files, it's maybe not as easy as it seems. There's not just a bucket of files in the corner somewhere labeled hidden, secret JFK files. And so we really need to get to the bottom of this. But I think ultimately the responsibility is on the president, who selects his cabinet deputies, who is the chief executive. He should become more engaged on this. Obviously, he has many things around the world he's thinking about on a daily basis. But these are really important stories. These are really important problems that we really need to get to the bottom of in American life. And so I just find it so frustrating. And if you're a chief executive of a corporation, you're not getting the information that you need from your subordinates. You put the squeeze on those subordinates. You say you have 30 days, get everything gone. I think Trump needs to channel a little bit more of that apprentice spirit and start holding some of his subordinates to task.
Well, speaking as somebody that competed on Celebrity Apprentice but never got fired because I won, Wajahat, I mean, that is what a chief executive does, right? You either get the information if you say you want it, and if you feel your team are hiding it, you fire the team and get people that will give it to you. So none of this really makes any sense. What do you think is going on here? What's your gut feeling about why there's been such a concerted attempt to deprive the public from seeing the full story on Epstein?
My take, based on the evidence of my eyes and ears, is that we're witnessing one of the biggest political cover-ups in modern history. And if I may, let me just give you an example of why I say that. First and foremost, we know that Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Pam Bondi openly told the American public, we're going to come in and we're going to release the Epstein files. It's going to show this cabal of corrupt pedophiles and sex traffickers. And then they got in power. They saw the files. What did they do? They closed the Epstein co-conspirator investigation. Done. Wall Street Journal, that flaming leftist socialist right, Wall Street Journal, reported that Pam Bondi told Donald Trump back in April that his name in some capacity was in these files. Donald Trump, when he was asked by an ABC News reporter, he lied about it. Then we know that at least 1,000 plus FBI agents were tasked by the DOJ to find Donald Trump's name and scrub it. They were all sharing the same Excel sheet, which means those FBI agents actually have that information, and we might actually have some whistleblowers from those FBI agents who were tasked from scrubbing the names.
So Chris outlines what he sees as the standard for leadership, arguing that responsibility ultimately sits with the president as the chief executive, since he is the one who appoints cabinet officials and sets the direction for the administration. In that framework, transparency isn't something that can be outsourced or treated as a secondary concern. It has to be actively driven from the top. When a leader campaigns on openness, accountability, or promises to address corruption, the expectation is that those commitments translate into consistent action once in office, rather than being absorbed by internal processes that never reach the public. He also emphasizes the importance of oversight within the executive structure itself. If key objectives are not being met, then holding subordinates accountable becomes part of the job. That could mean reassessing personnel, tightening expectations, or reprioritizing tasks to ensure that the administration's stated goals are actually being executed. What makes this point resonate with some observers is that it reflects a broader principle of leadership. Responsibility flows upward, not downward. Even among some supporters of the administration, there has been visible frustration that certain promises tied to transparency and reform have not materialized in the way they expected. From there, Wajahat Ali presents a more pointed interpretation of the situation, framing it as part of a larger and more troubling pattern. He argues that there is a noticeable gap between campaign rhetoric and governing outcomes, particularly when it comes to issues of disclosure and public accountability. In his view, the closure of the Epstein co-conspirator investigation stands out as a pivotal moment, especially when contrasted with earlier messaging that emphasized exposing corruption and bringing hidden networks to light. The perceived shift from those promises to more restrained or limited action is, for him, a central contradiction that demands scrutiny. He also references reporting attributed to sources like the Wall Street Journal, which suggested that the Attorney General reportedly informed the president that his name appeared in some capacity within related files. According to those reports, when questioned publicly, the president denied the claim. That alleged discrepancy between reported internal communication and public statements becomes a focal point in the broader discussion, because it raises questions about consistency, messaging, and what information is being acknowledged versus what is being withheld or disputed. At the core of this argument is a simple but persistent concern. If there is nothing sensitive or significant within these materials, then full transparency should not be difficult to achieve. The continued delays, partial disclosures, and conflicting accounts are what keep public skepticism alive. Whether the issue lies in institutional caution, legal constraints, political considerations, or internal decision-making processes, the lack of clarity itself becomes the problem. And as long as those gaps remain unresolved, debates around accountability and transparency are likely to continue, drawing attention from across the political spectrum.
What we've also seen so far is Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell was serving a 20-year sentence. She was complicit. She's a sex trafficker. No other person with her actual felony has ever been transferred to a minimum security camp in Texas where, Piers, I know you've been covering this, she is being pampered, receiving special treatment. And no one knows to this day why Ghislaine Maxwell got transferred. Finally, I will also say with Ghislaine Maxwell, she has the goods on this book, this 50-year-old, this 50th birthday party book of Epstein. Wall Street Journal reported it. Donald Trump got furious, threatened to sue them. Wall Street Journal said, go ahead and sue us. We stand by our reporting. And then you have seen that book with that drawing, and not just with Donald Trump, but all these other lewd, disgusting drawings. Then we saw Donald Trump threaten Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie, mock them, ridicule them, right? He did a post saying Republicans hold the line. It's an Epstein hoax. Once he saw that the votes were cracking, then he said, okay, I'll release it. So to me, this is the biggest political cover-up I've seen. And I'll say it again. If there's nothing to hide, he has nothing to lose. He can, just right now, Piers, as we're talking, Donald Trump can ask the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files. Thomas Massie said it yesterday. He was absolutely on point. You don't need any votes. He's negative 35 on the Epstein files. So you alluded to this. The best way for him to help his presidency, the best way for him to win over 80% of Americans, this is the only thing that Americans agree on, Piers, release the Epstein files. Democrats, progressives, independents, MAGA, all say release the Epstein files. He's sinking on this issue. MAGA's cracking over this issue. And I can only think that not only are other powerful men involved, but Donald Trump, his name is there, folks. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. But the best way to clear his name is I got nothing to hide. Here it is, unredacted. Look, I didn't do anything wrong. And then I also hope this entire panel agrees with me. I don't care if there's Democrats, philanthropists, celebrities, progressives, conservatives. If it is shown that these powerful men, regardless of their nationality, Ehud Barak, God forbid, rape girls, were complicit in the cover-up of raping of girls, I want all of these men to burn in hell.
The discussion then turns to one of the most controversial and closely examined aspects of the broader narrative, the situation involving Ghislaine Maxwell. The concern raised is not only about her conviction, but about how her incarceration has been handled in comparison to others convicted of similar crimes. Observers point out that she is serving a lengthy sentence tied to serious offenses involving exploitation and trafficking. yet questions persist about her transfer to a lower security facility. What fuels public skepticism is the lack of a clear, widely accepted explanation for that transfer. Critics argue that, in most comparable cases, individuals convicted of similar charges do not receive similar placements. That discrepancy has led to speculation about whether there are additional factors at play that have not been made public. While there may be administrative or procedural explanations behind the scenes, the absence of transparent clarification continues to raise questions in the public sphere. From there, the conversation shifts toward political dynamics and how narratives around this issue have evolved over time. Wajahat Ali highlights what he describes as a noticeable change in messaging from political figures, who initially dismissed the topic as overstated or politically motivated, only to later signal a willingness to engage with it as public and political pressure increased. This shift, he argues, reflects how issues can be reframed depending on the level of scrutiny and attention they receive. He also points to the fact that, despite growing bipartisan interest and repeated calls for greater disclosure, the full set of related materials has still not been made available. That ongoing delay, in his view, contributes to rising public frustration. When information is promised but not delivered, or when timelines continue to extend without clear justification, it creates space for doubt, speculation, and competing interpretations of what is being withheld and why. At the center of his argument is a broader principle about transparency. The idea is straightforward. If there is nothing sensitive or concerning in the materials, then full disclosure should be achievable without hesitation. When that level of openness does not occur, it naturally leads to questions about what might be contained within those files, and whether external pressures, institutional caution, or legal considerations are influencing the pace and scope of release. Wajahat Ali also raises a point about consistency in public communication. When claims are initially framed as exaggerated, misleading, or politically driven, but later revisited under pressure, it can create a perception that messaging is reactive rather than principled. That perception, whether accurate or not, plays a role in shaping how the public interprets the intentions behind those statements and actions. Ultimately, the argument returns to accountability and fairness. The call being made is not for selective scrutiny, but for equal standards applied across the board, regardless of political affiliation or status. In that sense, the emphasis is on transparency as a democratic value rather than a partisan issue. The expectation is that if wrongdoing exists, it should be addressed openly and consistently, and if it does not, then full disclosure should help resolve lingering doubts. As the conversation concludes, it leaves behind a central question for viewers. In situations where powerful individuals, institutions, and incomplete disclosures intersect, how should transparency be balanced with legal, political, and procedural constraints? And what level of openness is ultimately necessary to maintain public trust?